If you've been near a river where there is navigation, then you've probably seen barges moving up or down the river, and you may have even seen some using a navigation lock. And it may have made you wonder, why is it that we have these navigation locks and how do they work? So in this video, I'm going to answer both of those questions, and I'm also going to show a creative solution that engineers use to facilitate lockage when the tow is too long to fit into the lock at one time. So let's take a look at a navigation system. Did you know that a barge can go from the Mississippi River into the Arkansas River and travel through the entire state of Arkansas and even into the state of Oklahoma, all the way up to the Port of Catoosa near the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma? To do this, it needs to go through a series of locks and dams. Why do we even have barges? Why do we use barges to transport goods? Well, the very simple answer to that is that it's a very efficient way to move a lot of stuff. It's the equivalent of 35 train cars or 134 trucks. So let's get to that first question about why is it that we have these lock and dams along a navigation system? And in this case, we're going to be looking at a barge moving downstream, and the brown line is the stream bed. And you can see that it's not uniform, and there's going to be some times when we run into a shallow area. And in this case, this is not very dependable navigation if we don't have the navigation depth that we need. So the solution to this is to put up dams and form pools behind these dams. So now if we go look at that trouble spot, you can see now the barge does have enough depth for navigation. One of the issues that we face, though, is that when we put in a dam, we now have a differential between the upstream side and the downstream side. So to help overcome this differential, we use a navigation lock. So let's look at how the locks work. In this case, we're going to be moving a barge from downstream to upstream. So we open the downstream gate and we bring the barge into the lock chamber. We open up the upstream valve and allow water to flow from upstream into the navigation or to the lock chamber. This will cause the water level to rise in the lock chamber up to the same level that we have upstream. Then we can open the upstream gate and allow the barge to continue to travel upstream. It's really just the opposite if we're trying to go downstream. So in this case, we're trying to drop a barge down that's in the lock chamber. So we open the valve downstream and allow water to empty from the lock chamber into the downstream reach of the river. Once we get to that level of the downstream reach of the river, we open the downstream gate and then the barge can continue downstream. So that answers those two questions of why we have navigation locks and also how do they work. So now I want to show you that creative solution if we have a tow that's just too large. So in this case, we have 8 barges and it's being pushed by a towboat. The towboat's shown in red and black. And this can fit into the lock chamber all at once. So there's no problems here. But what happens if we have a tow that's much longer? And in some cases, we're going to want to have these longer tows, especially if they're carrying a lot of goods over a very long distance. They don't want to make multiple trips. They want to push as much as possible. So the first thing is that we're going to have to pull over to the side of the river before we get to the navigation chamber. And I'm going to keep track of how many times we have to tie and untie barges from each other or from the boat, how many times we have to lock through. The first thing that we're going to do is go through the conventional way of doing this. So the first thing we need to do is to untie the barges at this location. And now that they've broken apart, we then maneuver into the lock chamber. And since we're moving from downstream to upstream, we have to raise the barges and the boat. And then we push out of the lock when we're done. And now we have to go back and get the other barges. So we have to untie the boat, go back into the lock chamber, and now we have to go down. We have to get to the level of the downstream. And we go pick up the other barges, which again requires another untie. And we'll push into the lock, close the downstream lock gates, and then we'll lock back up. And then we'll push the whole tow back together and retie it. And that's the conventional way of doing it. So we had 4 tie-untie scenarios and 3 lockages. So now let's look at tow haulage. So I'm going to bring this summary up for conventional, and we're going to compare it to tow haulage. So in this case, we would push the entire tow into the lock chamber. We are going to have to untie because the entire tow doesn't fit into the lock chamber. And we can back off, close the downstream gate, and we do have to lock up. And now we can use something called tow haulage. So instead of using the boat, we actually use a system that's actually at the lock. And what this is, it's a rail and then these bits. And these bits are used to pull the tow out of the lock chamber for us so that the towboat doesn't have to do it. In this case, it's mounted to the top of the lock wall. And in some cases, you might see these mounted to the side of the lock wall also. And this is an example of tow haulage. So those 6 barges then get pulled out of the lock chamber. Now, we are going to have to, there's nothing in the lock at this point, but we're going to have to drop the level down so that way we can allow the tow to get back into the lock. So now we open up the downstream lock gates, pull into the lock chamber, and then we raise the towboat along with the remaining 6 barges. And then we can push these together and then tie them back up. So you can see in the comparison, we have the same number of lockages. So we had 3 lockages all together, but you can see that this effort of tying and untying and even securing the barges, that it's reduced in the scenario where we're using the tow haulage system. So once this is done, then the entire tow can then continue upstream. So if you found this video helpful, please subscribe to the channel. I do a variety of water resources videos, and you get notifications of when a new one comes out. And/or like the channel. If you like the channel, it gets out to a larger audience. And I do appreciate you watching this video.